I'm recording this with my new iPhone 17. I'm so swanky. So I have to put the phone away from my face a little bit because I don't have the microphone attachment that has the pop filter. So maybe someone can tell me if it sounds okay. So I wanted to talk a little bit about birth order in siblings and how it affects me personally. I'm not saying everyone, like I don't know people's experience, but everyone, so I really love statistics, even though there's a book called How to Lie with Statistics, because it is so easy to manipulate and what would be the word? I don't know, misrepresent the truth, I guess, with statistics. Like maybe the quintessential example would be when you have statistics about unemployment and they're all fudged, and it's always that they say that unemployment is below 10%, and if you look at the actual facts of the matter, it'll be something, it'll be by their own weird definition of unemployment, which is very, very narrow and not what most people would consider. And if you look at the real numbers, it looks way bigger than that. But I think with certain statistics and sociological data, it's just very interesting and very revealing. And it's a lot of it is stuff that the media does not want you to know, and it sounds conspiratorial, but I just mean that they don't want you to know because it's inconvenient and it'll make people start asking questions. It's not that they literally hide the truth from you, but the way the media presents things is because they have a narrative, everyone basically knows that. It seems like boomers don't really know that, and maybe kids, but basically everyone kind of knows that. So my sister gave me a book a long time ago called Born to Rebel. I never read it because back then I didn't really read books. And I thought, that's interesting that she gave me that book. I don't really know. I wasn't insulted. I was just like, I don't really know why you want me to read this. And now I understand. She didn't, explicitly state why. And I'm the youngest of 4 children. Now, so what I was going to say was, I'll finish that thought. So I think she was giving me that book because she was sympathizing with my position. And the premise of the book, the reason for that title, I knew this much about the book. I didn't read it, but I knew what the title was a reference to, which is basically the younger you are in birth order, the more likely you are to be quote-unquote rebellious, and especially the youngest child. And you can look at all sorts of examples. I don't think that that's necessarily always true, and people who like to look like they're skeptical or like they're intellectual will always say, well, I know this or that case. And it's like, well, yeah, but you just proved the rule. The exception proves the rule. Like, you're talking about an exception, So anyway, she gave me this book called Born to Rebel. I don't have it anymore because so much was thrown away when I had to move. And that's just the way that works. But that's basically what it was about. It must have gone into further detail, but I guess the focus was like maybe the problems that the youngest child will tend to have and stuff like that. Another really interesting statistic that I watched a whole video on with Robert Sapolsky, who's very interesting, but he's very on the left, and he's very Jewish in his thinking, for lack of a better way of saying it. He's very academic, but he's interesting to listen to. And I read one of his books, and I thought it was really quite on point. He's a determinist. He thinks that your biology, and see, this is where things get a little bit confusing, because if you're talking about what you would call the opposite of that, maybe like Aryans or something, or people who are sort of anti-Semitic or something, those tend to be the people that talk about genetics, and people who have, flawed genetics or superior genetics, that is basically kind of a misnomer, because superior relative to what? Like, you're talking about the modern world, so like if you're talking about superior genetics, it's in a context. Although I do think, you can say that and people will basically know what you mean. But I read a book by him called Behave, and it was about how genetics basically kind of determines what your life is going to be like. And that sort of goes against the grain of the liberal way of thinking, especially right now. So I don't really know what happened with that, and I don't think he had any controversy, but that was the thrust of the book, and it was meant to be in an empathetic way, like basically don't judge people because they can't help what they're doing. And that might sound like the type of person who defends, people in, the urban projects of Chicago or something, and they say that they couldn't help gang banging or whatever, and it's sort of like you're doing this thing of excusing behavior, and you feel so good about yourself because you feel like you're better than other people. But what he was saying was it wasn't about so much like, oh, it was racism and the person was brought up with racism. It was more like biology, so in that sense it was like vaguely right-wing. But anyway, and that was a really interesting book. So, but he does these videos on YouTube, and anyone can look it up. He did a video about depression or something and how he's depressed, and he did a video about schizophrenia, and I watched that, and that was weird because he was saying people with schizophrenia sometimes take things literally. The specific example I remember is when he said that the expression "loose lips sink ships." Certain people, I don't know like who exactly, and I don't think this would, like if you have schizophrenia, this means that you're not going to understand that. That doesn't really make sense to me. But he was basically saying, like, if you have this schizoaffective type of brain, then you're going to take that literally, and you're not going to know what the fuck the person is talking about, and you're going to imagine in your mind like a huge pair of lips sinking a ship, And I think that could apply to many people, depending on the circumstance, if you just don't really understand that well how the language works. But anyway, he did a video. Well, this is what I'm getting to. So he did a video where he was talking about this very well-known statistic, that the eldest sibling has the highest IQ. I know this from experience because my sister is smarter than me. I don't think she'd really like to hear me say that, She doesn't want, women don't want to hear other men self-deprecate, and they don't want to hear that. But I took a long time to grow up, and I had a lot of like new age beliefs that it took me until my late 20s to dispense with, and my life is that much sadder for it, because I need to believe in those things, and I need to believe that there's something else, and apparently a lot of people don't have that hang-up, if you want to call it that. So, but my point is, there's a statistic that the eldest sibling has the highest IQ. This has been measured, and it's one of those interesting statistics, because you can do something where specifically about IQ, like you can say, well, white people are smarter, white people score higher than black people on IQ tests, and then people can say that's racist, and you're just trying to make yourself feel better, or you're trying to explain away something that's caused by society or systemic racism and stuff. like, in other words, that's a complicated statistic. But when you're talking about the implications of that are, social and stuff like that, and people want to argue, people who don't really want to get to the bottom of anything and they just want to keep arguing about shit, they're going to argue about that statistic and say, well, the scores were faked or whatever, whatever they come up with, But with this statistic where you're talking about, we've studied it, and the eldest sibling always tends to have, on average, they always have like a couple IQ points higher score than. And I'm not even sure if it's like a sliding thing, where like, and then the next one tends to have a slightly lower, and then the next one a little bit lower, and then if it just keeps going down, I don't think that's even part of it. I think it's basically just like the eldest sibling tends to have the highest IQ, and then they come up with reasons for that, like, well, you have to learn how to kind of take care of yourself, or you might have to, if you have a younger sibling, then you have to look after the younger sibling, and that's going to develop your brain more or something like that. But it doesn't matter, because this isn't really helping anyone, politically. It's just a random statistic that people have noticed. Now, what I remember from his video, because he said, now so we all know this statistic, right? The eldest sibling has the highest IQ, and he's like, I'm going to explain why this doesn't mean anything. And I'm thinking, oh, it's cool. Like, I want to feel a little better about myself. Like, maybe I'm not so dumb, and like, maybe like I believed in the statistic. And by the way, I'm not just thinking about my own personal experience. It's just that it was a statistic that I heard that made sense to me and whatever. So then he's giving you this build up, like he has a premise, like he's going to explain to you. You can look this up. It's still on YouTube. He's going to explain why this is bullshit, basically. And he goes, there's a build-up. He's asking his students questions. He uses the Socratic method where he's engaging with his students and stuff. And then by the end of the video, he's like, okay, so here's the thing. The IQ, that average higher IQ is only by 2 points. And I'm thinking like, okay, yeah, we knew that. What's the next part? And then it turns out like that's all he's really saying is like that it's, according to him, insignificant, And it's like, dude, you just made yourself look unacademic, because if you're doing statistics, that's not how it works, and you're taking it from a large body of information and whatever, I forget the term, but like you have to have a certain high number of examples, and then it becomes statistically meaningful. And that's how they do that, I think. I mean, I don't think that statistic was taken from some random family. They did it like across the fucking board, like a lot of people. So he's saying the reason he thinks that it's meaningless is because it's only by a couple IQ points, and it's like, well, that doesn't really make sense, and that's how IQ works. Like, if one person gets 117 and another person gets 116, that doesn't mean anything because it's only a point. That's the whole reason for the points. So you might as well say that 99 is the same thing as 110 or whatever. So, but I'm kind of making it seem like I don't care for him. I think he's a little mixed up, but basically he's a real scientist. There's not a whole lot of like, everybody's the same and nothing matters and that type of nihilistic thing. I mean, he's nihilistic in the sense that he's sort of a determinist, but he's genuinely interested in the truth. It seems that way. And a lot of these academic types of people are interested in feeling smarter than everyone else, and they're not really that concerned with the truth. So anyway, I'm very interested in statistics, especially when they're random, just because I think they're very revealing. And it's very difficult to find certain things on Google. Now, because I'll just give you a couple of examples, whoever's listening. as if I'm talking to someone specifically, but I'm going to give a couple of examples of things that I've looked up that I've never heard anyone else talk about, just because I was interested and it occurred to me. I think we're on a downward slide in society because people don't have anything to look forward to. And the government is telling them how great AI is, and corporations are telling them how great AI is. And that's not something to look forward to. If Elon Musk wants people to get excited about AI, and to his credit, I think he sort of is, but he's so sort of Asperger's that he doesn't really know how to connect or something, like it has to be something other than robots, because robots are like, I don't know, 30 years away. I don't even know how long, but for people to actually have a robot helper in their apartment or wherever they live, and by the way, like, I'm not even that excited about that anyway. I would imagine a situation where it says, it's time to get up now, and then I'm sitting there, lying in bed and thinking like, I'll go back to sleep now, and then it's like hovering over me or something, and then I'm uncomfortable. I don't imagine a situation where I have a robot helper, unless it looks like R2-D2 kind of thing, where it kind of looks like an appliance, and then I'd be sort of okay with it. But so anyway, the statistic that I looked up, because I noticed this, and then because Google likes to obfuscate everything. That's why I use ChatGPT. And then you might say, well, ChatGPT is woke. Yeah, but you can sort of read between the lines. That's how I use it. I don't like to use Grok. Grok is okay. But Claude, and I'm going to get into Claude. Claude is, as far as I can tell, is the most accurate and is the most concerned with actually giving accurate statements instead of saying, you're right, the Beatles are the best band in the world, or whatever. I don't even know. So I looked up, has the rate of self-immolation gone up in the past however many years? Because as far as I'm concerned, that's not a very good sign for society. And it's something that I've noticed has been happening, and it turns out that the rate of, reported self-immolation, not reported by the person who did it, obviously, but reported cases of that the rate has gone up. You're not going to hear about that on CNN because it has nothing to do with how bad Donald Trump is. It has nothing to do with how great the stock market is. It's just a real indication of people's relative misery. And no one told me to look that up. I just looked it up, and then I don't remember, but I saw a graph, and it indicated that. And so another thing that I remember randomly thinking about was that the fact that I live in a relatively liberal state. I might get into that later, but I'm not even going to say the state right now. But so I live in, an East Coast liberal state, and I don't really like tips. I don't like tip culture. I'm not like, Steve Buscemi in Reservoir Dogs. I don't not tip, and I don't think it's like bad or whatever. But I don't like it. I don't like the whole culture, and I don't like the fact that I'm meant to pay part of someone's salary, or however you want to say it. I don't like it, and I tend not. First of all, I don't eat out, but when I do tend to eat out, I tend to not tip very well. And, that doesn't sound good, but I'll tip basically 18% or something, or maybe even 15%. It depends on how it goes and stuff. And it depends on whether I'm with someone and, various factors. But I'm not one of these people that just throws out 30% or something. And I thought, I was thinking about why I feel that way. And then I realized that I have sort of a reason, but it was in the sort of like like it was underneath the surface, and then I realized what I felt that the reason was that I don't really tend to be a very generous tipper. And it's because I live in a state where you get fucked by taxes. So if I'm going to live in a state where you get fucked by taxes, then shouldn't that be part of what, like, why is it up to me? You know what I'm saying? And I don't mean like in a resentful type of way towards whatever waiter or waitress is helping me, or however you want to say it. I just mean that part of my thinking is like, okay, well, you know, this state isn't really making it very easy for me, so aren't they going to be the ones that are like helping them, because we live in this supposedly liberal state where we care about working people, which is sort of a dubious sentiment anyway. You know, and so then I looked it up, and I looked up the states where tipping, you know, is highest and lowest, and it confirmed what I thought, which is that the most liberal states are the lowest tippers, and the most red states tend to be, they tip higher. And you might think, well, that's just because you can come up with different reasons for it, but in my mind, that's what I had in the back of my mind, which is this sort of thing of like, if you have a little bit of resentment already for the tax system and the disparity between the rich and the poor and stuff like that, you're going to be thinking like that, sort of like the government should do what they're saying they're going to do, you know, which doesn't really happen. But anyway, so I was correct about that. And I do think that that's partly why. If you live in a state like Florida, Texas, various states where it's not trying to tax you and almost trying to kind of like fuck you, especially if you're in the lower class, you know, and you can barely survive anyway. You're going to be more disposed to being more generous with someone who is in that position. So anyway, so now I'm going to talk about something a little bit darker, I guess. But so people know that I have depression and that I suffer from depression and stuff like that. And it's not, I'm not like a maudlin, morose person. It's just that various things have not. I'm trying to figure out how to say this without stumbling over my words, but it doesn't really feel like life has gone my way. So many people in my family have died. I grew up with 0 grandparents. I grew up without a lot of guidance. And I grew up in a world where, you know, a lot of things that I cared about became sort of secondary and degraded after around the year 2000, particularly music. So whatever, you know. But I also have some anxiety, which in its own way is sort of worse. So like I got to work this morning, and my boss, I was putting my keys down, and he did like a gesture, and it was like a guttural noise, like you know, obnoxious, you know, and he's kind of like moody like that, you know, and he was basically like, don't put your keys there. And it's not the end of the world, you know, it's fine, but like I'm already a little bit on edge, you know. And I was watching a girl on TikTok live, and she was talking about how she suffers from anxiety. And I could tell from the way that she was saying it that she wasn't trying to seek attention or anything like that. And it just sort of made me think that, you know, when you're talking about the reason that people, for whatever reason, but also the self-unaliving rate. I'm not going to use the word just because I don't think it's I know that it's something that's like sensitive on YouTube, and so I'm just gonna have to avoid it and do this sort of this weird unaliving term, which is kind of amusing, and it's in an ironic way, since it's about something that's sort of like the opposite of amusing. But I think some people become anxious to a point where, so like I feel like I don't belong anywhere, and it's making me feel like maybe I shouldn't be anywhere, you know? And I think that there's an increasing number of people that sort of have this feeling, if you're lacking community, like I've talked about this before, but I don't really belong here. A lot of the people around are nice, and that's nice, but the reason I'm online a lot is because I see so many more people that I vibe with online than in real life. And then other people would say, no, it's not that you vibe more with them, it's that they're online and you don't have to deal with them. I don't really know what to say to that, except that I really don't agree with that. I live in a place that's almost like hyper-conformist. And even though my politics tend to be on the more conservative end, I tend to associate with people that tend to be a little more liberal and just kind of weird. And kind of like on the fringes, because that's how I feel, you know? So no, it's not just because they're online. It's partly because of who they are. And these are the people that I become like friends with online. So all that's to say that I think people are missing the boat in a way a little bit when they talk about depression, because I think there are certain people that are almost like their nerves are kind of like almost at a breaking point, because they're like, what's the point of this? And I don't know where to go. I don't know what to do, you know? And this is something that we need to address in society. And talking about how great immigrants are, that's not going to address this problem. So anyway, this is another statistic that I looked up, and it relates to birth order. And it's something that, again, I had never heard, as far as I remember. I had never heard anyone talk about this. It's something that occurred to me because I know of my own experience in my family being the youngest. And that's largely that I felt, not all the time, but a lot of times, like I was left out. I was born into a family where the history had already largely happened, and my older brother and sister often left me out of things that they were doing, and it wasn't because they were cruel. I mean, they were being cruel without realizing it, but they were not bad people. It's just being a kid and not understanding things, you know. Although I will say that I've always tried to be like my sister, like, because I have two sisters, but like the one that's like younger but older, she used to want to play Barbie a lot. And I remember like just really, really not wanting to do this with her. But because there was no one else around, I would go down to the basement, because that, for some reason, all the toys were down there. And to whatever extent that I barely remember, you know, I played Barbie with her and like handled the dolls and stuff, you know, because it made her happy. And there was another thing that I did with her that I don't remember if I objected to this, because I remember really not wanting to do the Barbie thing. And it was only because it wasn't because it was a girly thing. I mean, maybe. But it was basically just like, that seems boring to me, I don't want to do it, you know. That was what was going through my 5 or 6 year old mind. But she would also do a thing where she would sit me at a desk, and because for some reason we had a school desk in our house. I don't really remember why. And she would play like she was my teacher, and I don't remember I remember very little about it. But I did that because, you know, she wanted me to do that. But mainly I remember really feeling like I was left out, and like I was too young to do stuff. I was too little to do a lot of stuff. Think about like in the movie Big, and he's not tall enough to ride the ride, like that type of thing. And I remember also that I would complain to my mom, and I wanted her to have another child so that I wouldn't be the youngest. And I didn't understand at that point that she was basically, she was too old. Then later, obviously, I understood that. But like when I was younger, I would say this to her, not really even understanding if it made sense, but just sort of expressing the sentiment, like I didn't really like being the youngest. And then she would tell me like, well, that's good because you're the baby. And anyone kind of listening to this would pretty much understand that doesn't feel good. That's not really what you want to hear, especially if you're a guy, I think. Like, you're the baby, like you're like helpless or something, and you're going to be doted on because you're the baby and you're helpless. And I did get resentment from my older siblings because, especially my older sister who was younger, said that I got a lot of attention or I got a lot of toys or something. And it was partly just the fact that by the time I was growing up, there were fewer opportunities for me as compared with the oldest sibling. And it was sort of a way of my mom sympathized with me, and that's what was happening there. And it was also the fact that I grew up in a family with older siblings that had a lot of behavioral issues, and I didn't. Like, I was basically well behaved until later, and that's also part of the reason that I was treated a little bit differently. So anyway, this is something that occurred to me. I don't know very many people who have unalived themselves. Fortunately, I know of people where I sort of suspect that might have happened, but especially in my I do know one person in my family where I suspect that it happened, but that's not the official cause at all, and I don't think in my family I know anyone who did that. And I know very few people in my life, so I mainly know like historical examples or whatever. But I just sort of figured that the way I feel and the way I felt all my life, or a lot of my life, especially after the age of about 20, where it seemed like it was just harder and harder for me to sort of move forward, while both of my sisters lived on their own, and I was living with my mom, and it made me feel pathetic. And, here I am, like, I'm completely on my own. I have to support myself, but I still don't really feel, like if you don't have a community for, in whatever way you define that, you're going to have kind of a problem. But so anyway, I thought this is another example of where I was looking up a statistic. Sorry if I'm taking a long time to get to the point, but I'm trying to make it a little bit more condensed. I don't know if it's noticeable. But so I asked Claude, okay, I'm going to start that over and edit out the S word, because this is so early on in my channel and I don't want to fuck anything up. Okay. So now I'm going to read this thing that I wrote that I asked Claude. What's the correlation between sibling order and self-unaliving rate? Then it says, the research on this is fairly consistent. Later-born children have a higher self-unaliving risk than firstborns. Here's what the studies show. The core finding. Later birth order is associated with higher self-unaliving risk in adulthood. A large Swedish cohort study found that for each step up in birth order, self-unaliving risk increased by 18%. A Norwegian study of over 1.6 million people found an even stronger effect. Each increase in birth order was associated with a 46% higher risk of self-unaliving among siblings. Why might this be? One sec. Researchers don't have a definitive answer, but several mechanisms have been proposed. Higher birth order was also linked to increased risk of accidental death, raising the possibility that the younger siblings may be more risk-prone or impulsive in general. Then it says, sibling bullying is a suggested pathway. Emerging studies show it is a potential risk factor for mental health problems and self-harm. Then it says, maternal depression and father absence partially explain about 8 to 12% the association, but most of the effect remains unexplained. Now, that happened with me. So my dad was much more attentive to my eldest sibling, and probably down the list like that. Now, it doesn't mean he didn't care about me or something, but by the time I was around, he was like working all the time, and he just didn't have a lot of time, you know. So then it says, important nuances. The association held even after controlling for age difference between siblings, number of siblings, marital status, and socioeconomic status. Now that's the important part, because you get these people, the nurture is more powerful than nature. You know, nurture before nature types of people. They'll everything is socioeconomic status, and that person was poor, and that's why they became violent or went into crime or whatever. So that was controlling for socioeconomic status. A Finnish study found a birth order effect for Finnish speakers but not Swedish speakers, suggesting cultural rather than purely biological factors may be at play. That I don't really know about that part. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me. And then it says, only children are a special case. They show a greater risk of self-harm compared to second or third born children, so they shouldn't be lumped in with the general birth order pattern. That's interesting. So if you're an only child, you'll be a little bit more prone, apparently, to self-harm. Maybe that's because if you have to take care of somebody or look after somebody, you're less likely to do that. Maternal age also matters. Each 10-year increase in a mother's age at childbirth is associated with a 57% reduction in the child's self-unaliving risk. That goes into my favor. So I think that would be because, like, if you're an older mother, you're that much more likely. This is not saying that, but I'm guessing, like, you're that much more likely to have really wanted to get pregnant, and so it's going to have a positive, effect on the child. Then the last part is, the overall picture is robust across multiple countries and decades of data, though the exact size of the effect varies by study and cultural context. So that's, evidence of what I suspected. Now, nobody's going to, tell me anything like this, but it just sort of goes to show you that a lot of this life we're living, and it's almost exaggerated or maybe accentuated. I'm not sure the word I would use, but because of this media landscape and how we have statistics and articles saying opposite things coming at us all the time. It seems like we've lost a little bit of our just natural wisdom, because you get scientists saying things like, well, actually nature fools you, and things like that, and so then you get a seed of doubt in your mind. But it's this thing where I grew up and with people telling me that I was spoiled, and this is what I was talking about with Gen Z, and that's why I sympathize with them, because I feel that it's analogous to that. You have Gen Z and they're told they're spoiled and they're coddled, and it's like, okay, maybe, but you're skipping over a whole bunch of other shit, because the older generations had basically a better life and a more fun life, and you're talking about well, I don't know why my son doesn't want to go to the bar and meet a woman and have sex with her, and it's like, well, yeah, you don't know. Maybe there's something to that, instead of just saying that he's soft or whatever. Anyway, all of this is not to say that, anyone should feel bad if you're a younger sibling. Obviously there are cases where, for whatever reason, the younger sibling has, ostensibly a better life, however you want to put it. And there are, different cases, and you can say that older siblings have more of a responsibility, so that's more of maybe some sort of a burden. That some woman just went into her apartment. I'm confused. It seems like there are two people living there, but they're like alternating or something. It's kind of confusing to me. But anyway, so this is not to say that it's bad to be the youngest sibling. But it's just, I guess I'm making the point that I feel like I was sort of gaslit, and that nobody ever really told me, like, it's okay, it's not really a great position to be in, but just make the most of it and you'll be okay. I never heard anything like that. All I heard was stuff about how I was spoiled and that I was the baby or something like that, and that I was favored, Anyway, so I find stuff like that interesting, stuff about birth order, stuff about sociological, statistics and whatnot. And also, by the way, just as a bookend or whatever, another interesting statistic related to birth order, and this is another one where it's very hard for them to make it political, but it's just true statistically, which is that the lower you are, what the fuck? How do you want to say it? The younger you are in a sibling hierarchy, if you're male, the more likely you are to be gay. It's just one of those things. And again, it doesn't mean that the youngest sibling that's male will be gay at all. It's just one of those statistical things. And it has something to do with some sort of thing in the mother that affects testosterone when the baby is in utero. Anyway, now I have to edit this, but thanks for listening.